What is going on, everybody? This is James D. Fury, and welcome to Blackballed. I used a really fat beat for our next guest. I hope he appreciates it. I'm not sure how much he likes hip hop or not, but I'm just saying that was a pretty dope ass beat. Our guest today is radiologist Dr. David Jacobs. I've known David in the digital sense for I must be a few years now. I, I'm going to talk to him about this specifically, but just as a little primer. I have noticed that since the pandemic started, some of his followers aren't really too happy with his positions. But you know what? We don't have to get into that too much because I know David doesn't like controversy either. But we'll talk to him about it right now. Please welcome Dr. David Jacobs. David, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing well, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Am I off by that? Because it's sometimes it's hard to tell. Other people's digital experiences might seem different from the outside in, but I have sort of noticed that I sort of pegged you as sort of like a soft conservative, I think, when I first met you online on Twitter, and then it seemed like when the pandemic started, some of the people that followed you weren't happy with what you were talking about, and it always floored me to see some of the comments that you got because I'm just like, do these guys know that he's a doctor? you know?
You know, basically what I try to do on social media is I try to be true to, not just true to myself, I try to be true to the information as it's presented to me. The information as I know it, and whether that be politics, pandemics, just general social issues. And I'm often wrong in the end because facts do change, or stories evolve, or information evolves. But I don't ever want to pander to an audience because I'm not a broadcaster. I'm a doctor. I'm an advocate for my profession. I'm an advocate for radiologists, and I want to make sure that that I'm not trying to be a celebrity, because really, how could anyone possibly be a celebrity in Canada on social media? It's such a small market anyway.
Dude, I don't think you're giving enough credit to Chair Girl.
Yeah, she.
I'm just saying. Just saying. So radiology. I may have made a couple of assumptions here, but as a radiologist, and during this pandemic, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've had like a front row seat to see what kind of damage that COVID-19 can do to a person's lungs. Is that an accurate statement?
Oh yeah, that's very accurate. Radiology is kind of a misunderstood field. So what we do are both diagnostic work and interventional work. So on any given day, I end up doing a lot of the breast cancer work for whatever reason. I've got pretty skilled hands for the biopsies. So on any given day, I'll do 6, sometimes even 9 biopsies of tumors. So most people don't really associate that with radiology. My interventional colleagues who are doing the heavy lifting that I don't do as much anymore, they'll be doing angiograms, so they'll open up closed off blood vessels, they'll put coils into people's aneurysms, they'll stop active bleeding from all through small little pinholes throughout the body. Through blood vessels. We also biopsy every tumor in the body. So I've backed away from this because we have a lot of younger interventional radiologists, but so they need time to do their work. But for years, I would do lung biopsies, liver biopsies, pancreas biopsies. That's the type of work that we do that's interventional. During this pandemic, a lot of what I was doing with COVID patients that was interventional was simpler interventions, just draining lungs, stuff like that. So we did have hands-on work with the COVID patients, but let's be frank, the majority of the hands-on work and frontline stuff was emerge docs, ward physicians, and ICU doctors. What we got to see was a bird's eye view of everything, because you can, so on any given day when I'm on call, I would see 150 patients. So you get an overview of everything that's coming through the emergency room and everything that's coming through that's in the hospital currently from an imaging point of view.
Yeah, and I was looking up some stuff before our interview here, and I saw this from National Geographic, and it says the world's brightest X-rays reveal COVID-19's damage to the body. And then I haven't showed you that. I probably should have showed you this
No,
before the
that's
show.
okay.
But this one, I believe the white areas are the COVID related infections. It doesn't have to be this picture, but can you give us a sort of rundown of what COVID does to the lungs and how it kind of differentiates from a typical pneumonia?
Yeah, so COVID's very interesting. And in medicine, you never want to be interesting, just as a by the by. You don't want to be an interesting case. But COVID was very interesting. So when it first came out, I remember I've got a fair amount of hair dye in my hair. I'm a little older than I probably look. I was around for the first SARS epidemic. So I was in hospital. I was just starting my career at that point. And so I know what SARS can do, and I've lived through it. And it was we were in one of the hardest hit hospitals up in Richmond Hill. So when I saw COVID come through, I had certain expectations, but they weren't quite what I was expecting. What we saw was a very odd pattern. So you'd have these faint, almost questionable areas of ground glass opacity, which means kind of it looks like somebody's put a little bit of sand on the periphery of the lungs, and then it would move in very quickly, and then it would really be quite like a whiteout of the lungs almost. And it had a very predictable pattern in terms of how it started, where it went, and it had a very predictable time frame of how it progressed, at least in the first wave. So you could look at an X-ray and say, that's COVID, right? And much more reliably than I could with the initial SARS. The thing that was really interesting, though, is when I first saw this, I said, that looks like something else that I've seen before. So I looked at it and I said, that looks like something called an eosinophilic pneumonia. And what
right.
fit?
Yeah.
So, but it's important. It's an important point because an eosinophilic pneumonia is an inflammatory pneumonia. So it's not. The damage caused by that is inflammatory. It's not the infection itself causing that. So I looked at that. I said, I wonder if steroids would work to treat this. And there was a lot of back and forth. And you got to be really careful about going out there and giving advice. I'm a diagnostician and I do interventions, but I'm not an internal medicine physician. So what ended up happening though is the doctors in Spain kind of said, they weren't thinking about eosinophilic pneumonia, but they were saying, is this inflammatory mediated damage, or is it an infection that's causing the damage? And they kind of did a Hail Mary pass, and they started treating with steroids, and they had some success. So I'm not sure exactly who to credit with that, but Spain was really on the forefront of that, and that saved a tremendous number of lives. So it's an interesting pneumonia, and clearly we've done as well as I think we can right now with it. It was quite something to see when it first started.
I remember, and I'm not trying to peddle conspiracy theories at all here, because it's not really about, like, I believe that this is a pandemic. I'm vaccinated. I'm about to get my third vaccination next week. I'm all in the areas where it's important. However, in 2019, myself included, my wife once, my ex-girlfriend twice, I knew 2 people my whole life who had pneumonia. And then in 2019, from the summer to like December, I literally knew like 15 people who were diagnosed with pneumonia. And I tried to be sleuthy about it, and I called a bunch of hospitals and I asked them just a general question of whether or not they kept any blood samples from all these people that were diagnosed with pneumonia in late 2019, and I guess hospitals don't really keep that stuff. That's what I was told. But is there like any circumstantial evidence or whatever that could indicate that COVID was here before um, January 2020 or whenever it said it was out? Because it just seemed kind of coincidental to me. And by the way, my lung infection lasted like 5 months.
I,
Like
it,
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 you know.
it's certainly possible, but you point to the correct idea that without the blood samples, without the sputum samples, how will we ever know?
Yeah.
My son had a vicious pneumonia, just before the pandemic really broke, a couple of months before, and I thought maybe could have been. I don't know. We've got a tremendous amount of international travel through Canada, and just because it exploded in Wuhan doesn't mean that it hadn't traveled outside of Wuhan before it exploded. I still believe that Wuhan is the epicenter of this, but it doesn't mean that you have to get a critical mass when you're dealing with exponential growth for people to take notice. And so
Mhm.
certainly a lot of people could have had it and made their way out of Wuhan, particularly given the fact that we know that there's a lot of asymptomatic spread from COVID. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say, well, maybe this was out a lot earlier than we thought.
Do they normally get rid of blood samples once results are in? Is that sort of how it works?
I
Just
would think
curious.
so. I
Yeah.
I know that tissue samples uh, traditionally were kept for a very long time. And I believe it's Iron Mountain was one of the big companies that would store tissue samples because sometimes you have to go back and look at the slides again. Now that those slides are digital, I don't know. I mean, we're in kind of a new age, but when I was younger, everything had to be kept for a very long time. Um, in terms of blood vials, just think about the volume of blood that we take in any hospital on any given day. It would be mountains and mountains of vials of blood. I can't imagine that they're kept for particularly long.
Well, would that have impacted? Maybe you don't know the answer to some of these questions. I know you're not a virologist or whatever, but would if we had started, if in the spring of 2020 which was apparently the first wave, if we knew that that was maybe the second or third wave, would that have impacted the evolution of the virus, or would that have impacted how we were treating it, or not really?
I don't know. I think that what I can tell you is this: our one big opportunity to snuff out the pandemic was at its epicenter in Wuhan. It doesn't. So if we had really truly contained it in Wuhan, and the Chinese government had prevented flights out of Wuhan and really early on acknowledged that there was a problem and kind of snuffed it out there, that would have gone a long way to preventing the disaster that we've been living through for the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Little embers floating all over the world. Yeah, I mean those are manageable. But what you really need to do is you need to contain the fire at its source. So since we weren't able to do that, what we lived through was inevitable.
Yeah, and I mean, we know the source in the sense that what province it was in China, but we still and this has really been interesting about how the evolution of the argument of the lab leak theory versus the bat wet market theory. I find that really interesting because about a year and a half ago, if you even brought up lab leaks, you were a racist, apparently. And now, um, I think
I
it's kind of the
actually
generally accepted theory, isn't it?
No, actually that's the opposite. Early on, I said that there's no way that this was a lab leak. So early on, I said this is likely an animal vector because that's how coronaviruses develop, like the last SARS that we had. So
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't a lab leak, and I thought realistically, this is unlikely to be a lab leak either. This is more likely to for us for a coronavirus to do what a coronavirus does and evolve as it does. We have a lot of interaction between humans and the animal world. We we somehow see ourselves as separate, but we're not. We're just another animal walking the earth. So everyone's surprised when there's a transmission of viruses between two different animals. We're an animal. That's how it works. So I never subscribed to the lab leak theory. Um, is it possible? Sure. I mean, when you're mucking around with viruses in a lab, yeah, I guess it's possible. I just thought it was unlikely. She was of the same mind. I think he's a little softer on the possibility now, but originally Fauci thought it was ridiculous. If you want to know whether you're on the right side of an argument with COVID, if you're on the side with Fauci, then you're on the right side at that time.
You just lost like 50 followers, my friend.
I don't.
I know. The reason why the lab leak theory seemed interesting to me is not because of the like it was being spread by. I interviewed General Spalding. He used to be on the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Trump administration, and there are people like him who wanted it to be the lab leak because they were looking for any excuse that they could find to be combative with China. Well, yeah. China specifically. But then when I started reading more and more about it, Jon Stewart had a really funny interview where he was like, just because there is a lab in Wuhan that studies the coronavirus and this particular coronavirus doesn't mean that the coronavirus that we're experiencing came from the lab and the exact it's like, yeah, I guess it's kind of a coincidence. I don't know. Did they set up the lab there because it was rife with coronaviruses in that area?
My understanding is that because it's close to where the bats are in China, that made the most sense to set up the lab there. So yeah. I think that's it's kind of like when you see that meme on the internet with a huge crater in the ground and a visitor center right beside it, and they're like, oh my God, another few feet and it would have taken out the visitor center. It's like, no, the visitor center is there because that's where the meteor hit. So it's, you can argue it both ways. Again, this is so far beyond my area of expertise. I mean, how on earth would someone like myself, who's basically an anatomist, start parsing through data that is best served by a geneticist and a virologist? And at a complex level, I couldn't possibly.
Oh yeah, well, I can because no, I can't.
Because the internet.
No. I find it interesting. I actually don't think we're ever going to solve that issue, like of where it came from.
No.
I don't know if it's important from a medical standpoint. It's probably super important from a geopolitical standpoint. And there's a part of me that, and now we're just conversing. I don't expect you to be an expert in everything that we converse about, but there is a. I kind of hope, even if it was a lab leak, that we never find out, because then I can just see a war taking place as the world decides, holy shit, we're dealing with a nation that, may have infected the planet, and not even nefariously. Like the lab leak theory that makes the most sense to me is the one that says it accidentally escaped the lab. I can buy that, I don't think
no one is going to purposely infect their own population. I mean, and if anyone is kind of like a Bond villain right now, looking at this saying "mwahaha," they've got to understand exactly. Look at you,
yeah,
exactly.
That's all I have to do. I don't know how to say anything. People just know.
Austin Powers, man.
Yeah.
So. If you can see right now that a viral weapon is a ridiculous thing to put out because it's uncontrollable. You can't control it. You might think you can control it, but it'll mutate, and eventually it'll come right back at you. It's like throwing a boomerang with dynamite attached to it. It's not a good idea.
It's probably not smart. Yeah, that's right. I also I remember SARS because I was living at Spadina in college when SARS came.
There you go.
When SARS made its first appearance, and what I recall from that though that kind of bothered me is that I had this routine every day. I would walk out of my house. I'd walk down towards Kensington. say hi to Christy Blatchford, who was almost always walking her dog. God rest her soul. I don't believe in God, but rest in peace. And then I'd go get my coffee, and I'd come back home. I think I grabbed a paper along the way, and then I'd turn on my TV, and they would be like, Chinatown is all wearing masks, and people are like afraid on the street, and I'm just like, no, it's not like that at all. I live there, you know.
Yeah.
The difference between then and now, as far as the media concerned, not that much. What is the? How did we contain the first SARS outbreak? Why
We
didn't
got
that turn
lucky.
into a pandemic? You know.
We got lucky. It had so the first SARS pandemic was predominantly spread inside hospitals. It wasn't as contagious as any of these variants have been, and so it was predominantly spread from patient to patient and patient to nurses. We lost a lot of nurses in the first SARS pandemic, and that was tragic. But that's why the population. I remember. Um, Boy, it brings back a lot of memories. I was working at the hospital, and we had to go to an event afterwards. My wife and I, newly married, and we. So I went to the event, and afterwards, there was a lot of talk. And should he be here? Why was he there? And then my wife was actually asked not to come into work for a while, despite the fact that I was had asymptomatic. She was even more removed, and it gave you a little insight into the human mind and human nature. So so yes, there's lots of banging. There was no banging on pots or cheers for the healthcare worker. There was more a slight unease and maybe a little bit of I wouldn't say disdain, but just kind of like maybe you don't come around here right now. So when I remember that quite vividly from the first SARS, and none of the behavior that's happened during this wave, positive or negative for physicians, surprises me. Uh, it's
Do you have
disappointing, but it is what it is.
every time I've ever been to a hospital, and I'm specifically thinking about when, excuse me, when my wife gave birth to our two children. Um, it felt like nurses were like the backbone of the hospital. Like whenever, no offense to you, I know you're not a nurse, but you're a radiologist, but like I saw the doctor that delivered my wife's, our first child, um, like 2 seconds before she was dilated to the appropriate amount or whatever,
Yeah.
and then the 20 minutes that my wife pushed the baby out, and then for 10 minutes after that, and that was it. And the rest of the time, for like a day and a half, it was nurses. And I walked away that first time having so much, not that I didn't before, but like a profound respect for nurses in the hospital. And I feel like there's kind of like the unsung heroes of the pandemic in a lot of ways. Which makes it really confusing why there seems to be a higher percentage than normal of them who don't believe in vaccines.
Ah, see how you turn that.
Yeah.
Um, so
And I'm not asking you to trash nurses. I'm just wondering if
yeah,
it like,
no,
yeah.
I don't fully understand it. And it's not just nurses. We have technologists who don't want to get vaccinated. We've got a very small sliver of doctors who don't want to get vaccinated. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me because you can see in the hospital how sick the sickest patients can be from COVID. And you can see that these patients were perfectly fine walking around. And if COVID hadn't been there, they would be alive for another 30 years easily, some of them, even longer. So it's always been a mystery to me as to why people in healthcare, we can take it away from nurses, it's just why, when you know what is out there, when you've seen it with your own eyes, why wouldn't you protect yourself? I can't explain it.
Yeah, it's a very strange phenomenon. And you know, is there I know COVID just seems so strange because there's no real way that regular people can speak about it competently, because it's been so fluid. And the fluidity of this pandemic has kind of made it so that facts that are facts one day are not necessarily facts the next day, or from one wave to the next. The way
Well,
that it
and that's
evolves, yeah.
yeah, that's very true. I mean, the first version of COVID that we saw uh, behaved very differently, and Delta, which was a rough one, we saw did respond very well to the vaccine, and you could prevent spread with the vaccine. With Omicron, the vaccine works extremely well, as does the booster in terms of preventing severe disease, just like Delta, but it doesn't work so well in terms of preventing spread. And that becomes a whole political problem and an ideology problem, because you know, it takes so much momentum to get the government to move in one direction or another, that when you suddenly the virus decides, well, I'm changing how I behave, it takes a long time for the government and the pundits and the advocates and the you know and the purists and the people who reject the science and all that to catch up. It takes a while, and by the time they've caught up, there's a possibility something new is on the horizon.
And it's that fluidity, in my opinion, that has led to the sort of explosion slash activation of all these conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists, because I can't remember another situation except for 9/11 that had all of these ancillary details that made it easy for people to believe in something that wasn't true.
There, it's been a tough one. It's been a tough one. It's been a tough one right from the beginning. If you'll recall, I had a bit of a back and forth with Matt Gurney. Matt Gurney was the first one to pull the alarm bell at school, and I was like, Matt, come on, man.
Let's just, I did that. I did that a lot during exams too. I did that a lot. Okay,
I would not recommend that. So I was when I first saw it, I figured, okay, this is going to be another SARS, and it's going to be containable, just like the last SARS was. Well, I was dead wrong. And there's a lot of, and then people started coming out saying we don't need masks. Well, I was one of the first guys to say, no, you do. Look at Taiwan, they're winning. So do what the winning team is doing. Taiwan is winning and they're wearing masks. So let's do that. So, you know, if you're sitting there at home and you hear an expert say, don't wear masks, and then the next day they say, wear masks, well, it leaves all sorts of room for somebody who's prone to conspiracy theories.
Yeah, the mask thing is still difficult because I think, aren't we at a place now where what we're saying is that the N95 masks are great, the cloth masks, negligible?
So it's always a matter of degree. If somebody's coming at you with a sword, yeah, you can have a full suit of armor, you can have hockey gear on, or you can just be wearing a paper bag. I'd like the full suit of armor. I'm going to choose the hockey gear over the wet paper bag. So you know, there's different levels of protection, and I think with Omicron, it becomes a little bit more difficult because it's so damn contagious. And is it realistic to think that everyone's going to be walking around with N95 masks? Probably not. I think that the better way of doing this is making sure that everyone is protected against severe disease. And if we can do that through vaccination, then we're blessed to have that option.
I'd like to treat the second half of this show just by sort of dispelling medical myths as much as you can. I really love how you say that you're not an expert in this, that, or the other thing. You don't have to say that anymore.
But like, it's understood that I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, it's understood that you're a radiologist and that you're so accurate that you don't want to mislead people into thinking that you're a virologist. But like maybe these are sort of overarching questions that maybe you can answer. You can't answer, that's fine. But So the each hospital will get $22,000 for every death that's labeled COVID. True or false?
I've never heard of it.
Okay. It seems like that's something that would be made up.
That's
Maybe in the states that might exist, but it seems
I couldn't even imagine that that would be in the States. The reality of it is that hospitals get a global budget. The budget is negotiated at the beginning of the year. There are some health outcome, sort of special procedures that the government wants us to do. They're more complex. They are uh, traditionally it would be less lucrative. They eat up a lot of hospital resources. So I think those are something based procedures, QBPs, quality based procedures. So they have all sorts of ways to incentivize a hospital to do things that they would otherwise maybe not want to have that program. But I've never heard of that for, that's like a hip replacement, or that's like, can
right.
you do gastric bypass surgeries or something like that? It's not, can you take care of a patient with a pneumonia? Never heard of that.
Okay. The another thing is the way that vaccines were rolled out and how the mixed vaccines, the AstraZeneca to Pfizer and Moderna, originally had a really high efficacy rate, and then it went down. I'm of the mind. What actually your analogy that you just said worked perfectly for what I'm about to say, which is that even an overestimated vaccine efficacy rate is better than no vaccine.
Absolutely, particularly when you see how devastating COVID is on the lungs. So some people get lucky, and some people are very unlucky. And if you're very unlucky from COVID, it can be life changing or life ending. So uh, all you need to know is that there were almost scuffles in the lineup to get vaccinated among the healthcare workers. Everybody wanted to be first in line to get that damn shot. We know that there are a small percentage of healthcare workers who didn't get it and won't get it, but that's a
Mm-hmm.
vanishingly small number of doctors and nurses. From a doctor's point of view, it was, I think the initial uptake was over 95, 99%. It was very high. So, you know, it was well tested. Nobody overseas grew a third eye out of the back of their head. So we knew that it was going to be fine. If you understand the basics of cellular biology, which we all do, we knew
Of
that
course.
the mRNA was never going to make it into the cell nucleus to impact our DNA. It doesn't work that way. That's like saying, yeah, I'll keep away from the analogies, but it was just, it's biologically um, uh, dubious to say the
My
least.
my favorite was reading about couples who they would get divorced because one of them would be vaccinated and say it was the husband, and then the wife was just like, I can't be with you anymore because if we have sex, the spike proteins will give me internal bleeding.
I strongly suspect that divorce was uh, in the cards prior to COVID.
Yeah,
I think
maybe it could have been the husband that convinced her of the spike proteins. Really, honey, I'm just saying. You may want to call the lawyer because I don't know if I'll do some
I think
damage
that
here.
was probably more an inevitability than a casualty of COVID.
Okay. Next medical controversy or whatever you want to call it. I don't know why this one is so difficult to understand. The dying of COVID versus dying with COVID. I think by now we all understand that people who die of COVID alone is fairly low. It's like 7 or 8%, and then the people that die with COVID because the person has a pre-existing condition, and anti-vaxxers use that as a main talking point, and I'm just of the mind where it's like, listen, if you have debilitating illnesses that have slowly and gradually led you to the edge of the cliff, and then COVID comes up and just nudges you over it.
Gives you the
That
gentle push.
You're right. That's
So,
still
so,
dying of COVID, in my view, isn't it?
it's actually, you're wrong. So
Get the
you're
fuck
wrong
out.
on that
Listen,
one.
okay, you're fired.
So
Cut his mic. Someone cut his mic. I'm just
there,
kidding.
there are two extremes.
Okay.
There's the puritanical COVID zero group, and then there are the anti-vaxxers. both groups are wrong. They're wrong.
Okay, but I'm neither of those
Because
groups. So how am I wrong? I need to know that first.
oh,
It's killing
okay,
me.
so and that's why we can have it, and that's why we can have an intelligent conversation about this.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at something that can have asymptomatic spread, so it's asymptomatic spread, and you have 100 people in a room, when you test those 100 people, a certain percentage will end up having COVID. Some of those people will remain asymptomatic, some of them will get sick. Of the ones who remain asymptomatic, some of them might get hit by a truck, right?
Right.
So if you test them, I'm pretty darn sure that it was the grill of the Mack truck that got them. It
Right.
wasn't COVID.
Right.
So right now, when you look at the statistics in Ontario, it can be anywhere from 30 to 40% of patients are in hospital and they happen to have COVID versus in hospital who are sick from COVID. And you can
Okay.
tell there's a glaring difference. One of them is going to have a chest x-ray that's perfectly normal, and the other one's going to have a chest x-ray that's almost whited out. So there really is a big difference. And I think that that's a place where ideology and politics has made it impossible to have a rational conversation around that. So different sides of the argument push a narrative, and
Mm-hmm.
the COVID zero group requires high numbers of COVID in order for their narrative to make sense, whereas the anti-vaxxers require low numbers of COVID for their narrative to make sense. Personally, I don't give a damn about either of their narratives. I give a damn about what's in front of me, the patients in front of me, and what that means in terms of how to take care of them, hospital capacity, and public health measures. So that's really the sweet spot, and that's what everyone should be gunning for. But the loudest voices in the room, unfortunately, usually take over the conversation.
Okay, but specifically, because I still don't know what I was wrong about, so I'm going to ask again. Specifically, if you the people that die of COVID alone with nothing else,
Yeah.
pretty low, 7% or so, and then people that die with COVID and have other pre-existing conditions that they may have that, and COVID pushed them over the cliff. To me, again, that's like an AIDS patient developing pneumonia and dying of pneumonia,
Oh,
and then
for sure, for sure.
yeah,
So
okay,
if you have somebody who's on the floor, who's a fragile elderly patient, and they have a COVID pneumonia, and they also have heart disease, a cancer, and dementia. They died from COVID. All right,
right,
COVID was the last straw. That's
okay,
clear, right? So that makes a lot of sense. But when you've got somebody, and again, we'll go to the extreme, an asymptomatic 20-year-old who comes in after a motor vehicle collision and dies on in the emergency room, and they happen to test positive for COVID, that's not the same thing. So we have a lot of patients in hospital right now who are there for fractures, and they happen to test positive for COVID because it has a very high prevalence in the population currently. So we have to kind of balance those two things. But yes, the fragile elderly who where COVID is the last straw that broke their back, yeah, that should be a COVID related death because that's what pushed them. And if it wasn't COVID, if they came in and had influenza and died, you wouldn't
right.
debate that. You'd say they died from influenza, right? So we've got to we've got to depoliticize COVID and look at it in a rational frame.
Yeah, it makes me worried, man. Like, when the next pandemic comes, and it's gonna come, you know, are we going to have this army of anti-vaccination people who remember this time? And are we going to do this all over again? Because I'm super worried about civil unrest. And I'm not even talking about Ottawa. I know you don't want to talk about it. Neither do I, to be honest with you. But civil unrest in the more general sense, this polarization and what it's doing to us, and it's pulling us apart. I don't see, and maybe this is where you and I might actually might have a political agreement, which would be that I don't see this government since the beginning with a clear message, even though the situation was fluid. When one of their facts was then contradicted by their own health minister, a week later, they never stopped and took the 10 seconds to own the fact that they got it wrong a week before. Have you
So,
noticed that?
oh, I notice that in politics all the time, and I'll be courteous to not even attribute it to one party or one country or anything. This is modern politics. Modern politics is about gotcha. Modern politics is about never saying that you're wrong, because they'll take a video clip of that and play it over and over again. Modern politics and social media and media have become very much intertwined, and they have been in the past, but it's so easy to twist words and whatnot that people are very hesitant to admit fault. The other part of modern politics that is really disturbing to me, and you touched on this, is the fact that politics of division works. And we've seen that. Now I will point a finger. With Trudeau, politics of division has been very successful for him. And we've seen that not just with Trudeau, but with other governments over the years, and some very nasty governments as well. Fascism makes strong use of that. We know that it works, and it saddens me, but doesn't surprise me, that politicians are willing to go to that well in order to win power.
That
It
never
speaks.
surprised me before either, but it did. Like I said at the beginning of this pandemic that, and I felt this way for like a week, and then it was clear that it wasn't happening. That if anything can sort of like put the polarization thing on pause, it would be like a worldwide health crisis, and it
Apparently
just
not.
deepened. No, it got worse. It got so much worse. And there's all these bad actors that are putting politics ahead of the public good. And it just revealed that our entire planet is leaderless. If we're not run by gangsters, we're run by dummies. Do you know what I mean?
Well, we're run by people who won popularity contests. And sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. Uh, or as you said, we're run by gangsters, people who took power by force. Nietzsche has the best one on that. If I've got it right, something along the line of power is there on the floor to pick it up if only you'll just bend low enough. So
Wow, that's a good one.
I think he may have said in the gutter, but
Yeah.
he's and that's true. But it's a sad truism. I mean, many people do go into politics because they want to make things better. Um, but the nature of politics in 2022, it's not such a nice thing.
No, it's not. I'm of the firm belief that party politics is the main culprit in that sort of rabid partisanship. Like it literally comes from that word. Excuse me. But I have this dream that I had a dream. No, I won't do that. I had this dream that maybe one day we can get rid of parties and people can run as independents, and we'll still have the same amount of seats in parliament, and then they'll be forced to actually debate issues because none of them represent an entity anymore. They would just represent their constituents. They would figure out, okay, here's the problem. How are we going to deal with this problem? Sure, they're gonna be people that like then form groups and they don't call themselves parties. But the people, I think the people want honest debate, not ideological solutions to problems that are too important.
It would be nice, but I think that unfortunately you end up with either a bunch of parties of one who are voted in for single issue agendas, and you see that a lot with the both the liberals and the conservatives right now. You have MPs who are elected by a narrow group of people within their constituency because they said, I'm going to make sure that we get a factory built in our town, or I'm going to make sure that abortion rights come to the forefront, or I'm going to make sure that abortion rights are never brought up. So you've got some people with very narrow scopes who are going to end up with no ringmaster, no way of kind of saying, yeah, you know what, don't say that. You can't say that, or that's racist. Please don't do that. Or let me educate you on that, because what you're doing is going to hurt yourself. It's going to hurt people. So if we've got a bunch of individuals in Parliament, there's also there are unintended consequences as well. I just wish people were a little bit more noble. That's it. I just wish people were just a little braver. It would be nice.
I agree. Bravery we're in short supply of bravery. We're also very much. I was saying this yesterday. I think it was yesterday. I was talking to Karima Saeed about when I was young, and I don't know how old you are. I'm 45, so we might be close to the same age. And
I
you're
got a few
laughing.
years
I don't know
on
why
my
you're
friend.
Okay, good. You look better, so fuck it. But I remember being young and being told that the TV will rot your brain. It's the idiot box, this, that, and the other thing. And now we carry one in our pockets, and it's designed to make us angry.
Yep.
Are we? Is anyone really surprised that we are where we are then? With
No.
that kind of evolution?
No, and I've got to tell you, I've been giving it some thought this morning and last night as well, in between cases. It was a busy night last night. Holy smokes. But I've been giving some thought about my use of social media and how it's evolved and where it should go. I started off kind of as an activist trying to push against the Wynne government because she had really damaged healthcare quite considerably. And most physicians at the time were pushing back. And I had clever, clever tweets and made all sorts of memes that were very popular and not nice, though. They weren't nice. And
A
then,
little bit of salt you put on those memes. Is that?
oh, yeah. A little bit of salt, a little bit of lemon. Not so nice. And then again, Trudeau upset me about a couple of things. He wasn't even on my radar, but then just time after time, I was like, how can you do this? And then again, I was pretty salty with him as well, memes and stuff. And then I thought, is this really appropriate for somebody my age? And I tried to justify it, saying, well, listen, this is like caricatures. This is like political cartoons. But is it really, and is it necessary to get the point across? I don't know. It was certainly effective, but I can't say that I really want to go back to.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think social media is kind of the devil, and it's unfortunate because now what do we do? Because many of us, including myself, we rely on it for what we do for a living so much that I don't want to see the abolition of social media. I don't want to see the censorship of social media either, but with something populated with so many millions and in some cases over 1 billion people, you can't control that. You can't get that genie back in the bottle. There's going to be bad actors that influence people that are low information people, right? Like that, it happens. We just saw it happen in this pandemic. And it started with the documentary Plandemic, which immediately, it was like February or March or maybe April of 2020. And I had friends calling me like when they saw it, like, can you believe this? That fucking Fauci guy is like taking our money and fucking trying to kill everybody and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they sent me this documentary and it's really well produced and it's like believable. And
it's so is every Star Wars movie, but it doesn't mean that I think that we live on a planet in a galaxy far, far away.
I don't know if I would
and
say
that,
the Star Wars movie was predictable, but okay, I think I get your greater point though. Yeah.
I agree with you. Listen, there's we're not getting rid of social media. We're not getting rid of the internet. We're not getting rid of smartphones, and it comes at a very, very steep price. And it comes at our so we increase our productivity a bit. We increase our connectivity a bit. I mean, this is nice. I like this. We
Yeah.
increase the dissemination of information, but we decrease our physical contact with people. We decrease meaningful interactions with people. We allow ourselves to be horrible people under the shelter of anonymity. We bring a lot of bile into the world that way.
Yeah, I don't like the
And
anonymous aspect of social media. I can't stand that, to be honest with you.
although some people are willing to be really nasty with their faces plastered on it as well and their names. So,
Why? What did you
but
hear? I've toned it down a bit. I've toned it down a lot since the beginning. I actually hated Twitter for years because I forgot that it existed even until I started working with Dean. I started
yeah,
I didn't really tweet that much. And it was just because of like you can't go there and just be like, "Hey, I agree with what you're saying." Like someone's just going to call you a dick just for saying that, And I was like, "What is this place?" And now I'm just like I accept it for what it is, and I think it's made me better, not worse. Like I try not to call people names, and if I do, I try to be like funny about it. A friend of mine said something to me the other day, like you're really good at patting people on the head while kneeing them in the balls, and I was like, okay, I'll take it.
that's awesome. Yeah, the backhanded compliment.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, Twitter's a really nasty, nasty space, and I'm fortunate now that I have enough people who I can talk to and interact on Twitter. Enough, they call them followers. I just people who listen to what I say.
yeah, it's
Um,
demeaning, isn't it?
isn't it though?
Followers.
Nobody's following me. They're just it's like I'm putting something out there, and they choose to listen to it or not. They're not
Yeah.
following me.
I met Jay
So
Z once, and I had to talk this like security guard into and letting me backstage. And to his credit, he let me backstage, and someone who was like one of Jay Z's bodyguards or something was like, "Who the fuck is that guy?" And the door guy that let me in, or whatever, was like, "He's a fan," and I was so offended. I was like, well, listen, not to split hairs here, but I'm a listener of his music. I'm not a fan. I don't know. And they were like, well, you're gonna have to leave then. And I'm like, it was one of those moments where I was like, just shut the fuck up, stupid. And then, but my pride was like, no, I'm not a fanatic for anyone. You know what I mean? Like I'm just a guy that likes his music. And then I shook his hand, and he barely looked at me and walked away. This is totally fine. But anyways, the follower thing is all, and I think it was designed that way. It feels like it was designed that way. People want followers,
I,
like
I think so. It gives you this false sense of prestige, and I think it actually, in some ways, enables you to talk down to people, which you shouldn't
yeah,
be doing.
no,
And so, the one thing that I changed early on is I stopped kind of going after individuals who were saying nasty things. Occasionally, I'll wipe out the name and the and their any recognizing anything that you could see. Oh, I know who that person is. Any identifiers, and I'll say, listen, this is kind of silly. Don't say that, or I might be a little saltier than that. But even that, I'm trying to get away from. The last couple of days, there have been a lot of revelations that have come out where I've said something, been ridiculed for it, and proven to by experts, and proven to be 100% correct in what I had said. With new research and numbers and their predictions being completely wrong. And I put it out there. I said, "You're wrong. Here it is. Here's what you said. Here's what it is." And you know what I've learned from that? It doesn't really give you much satisfaction being right, because if they're not
yeah,
going to give you the satisfaction of admitting that they were wrong, it doesn't change the fact that they were nasty to begin with. And it also doesn't convince anybody of anything. So I think probably, and this is an epiphany of maturity at my mature age, probably the best thing to do is to just talk about what you know and what you believe and the information that you have to support it, and leave the jabs out of it. You know,
I think
mind
I
you,
think you're right. Yeah.
I'm getting jabbed by some pretty big people in the newspapers, so I'm like,
Yeah.
eh. It does. It's like that kind of stings. It's not very nice, and but at the end of the day, I'm
Yeah.
probably the only one paying any attention to it.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because there's a lot of funny ironies out there. Like I saw someone post something on Facebook actually, this anti-bullying campaign, and someone's like, Where'd you hear about this?" And he's like, "On Twitter." It's just like, you know. Um, Listen, we're gonna wrap now, but I just wanted to show you this again, just because I didn't show you this before, but I should have. But this is that whole National Geographic diagnostic imaging of what COVID looks like in the lung. I think COVID is like the blue or the white or whatever. I could be wrong about that.
That's fantastic. I think that's a cadaveric X-ray. They've got a new type of a new machine that gives you almost pathology slide-like details.
Oh,
Um,
right on.
and but you can only do it on cadavers right now.
Oh, okay.
So I
Well,
believe that's a cadaveric sample. I could be wrong, but that's I think that's the technology.
okay. Well, I wanted your expert opinion because I recently had my own lungs x-rayed. And I just want
Yes.
to show that to you, and just wondering if you see anything, that I should be worried about.
Oh, Lordy. Yeah, you need to rethink your life choices, is what that X-ray says.
Okay, because I feel fantastic. I got to tell you.
I'm sure you do.
No, I'm not high. I don't get high before shows anymore. Dean told me I wasn't allowed, so that's good. Um, Dr. David Jacobs, thanks, man. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. You can follow him on Twitter at Doctor. It's different than your name, at Doctor Rad Jacobs.
Jacobs,
At
it's
Jacobs.
at DRJACOBS for radiologists at
Okay,
Dr. Jacobs.
he's a great follow. He's civil. He's less salty than he was 2 years ago. And he's a medical professional. And I really enjoyed having you on the show. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's always nice
No,
talking with
nice talking to you, buddy. Yeah, Dr. David Jacobs. He's a good guy. He's funny because he has a lot of humility, and I think I described him in my preview as a renowned radiologist, and he said that he got some flack for that from coworkers. So sorry about that, David. Yeah, tune in about an hour on the Dean Blundell show. I'll be there, and until then, thank you for joining me here on Blackballed. I'll see you later.